Hey there, Alex Kidman from Alex Reviews Tech here with my MacBook Pro M4 review. Though I'm taking a slightly different tack with this one. The MacBook Pro M4 took a little while to get to me, and there's a million and one other reviews out there, many of which you've probably already seen. So I wanted to dive primarily into performance here, and specifically around the idea of whether or not the M4 is worth upgrading to if you've got an existing MacBook Pro, which I think will probably cover a lot of the market for this particular laptop. If you are coming to the MacBook Pro for the very first time, then the simple form of this review is, yeah, this is a nicely powerful machine, slightly cheaper than the equivalent model last year, reasonably well built, but consider whether or not, if you are looking at the Apple space for the first time, the MacBook Air might not be enough for your needs, because unless you need that Pro power, it's quite a nice machine and it will save you a few bucks going down that route. The design of the MacBook Pro certainly hasn't changed a whole bunch. Apple tends to find these designs and stick to them for a good long time, and that's mostly what they've done here. I mean, I do like the fact that even for the baseline M4, which is what this is, Apple has now bumped it up so that there are 3 Thunderbolt ports on every MacBook Pro, although there is a speed difference. The baseline one only gets Thunderbolt 4, whereas the M4 Pro and M4 Max lines get Thunderbolt 5 if that speed difference is important to you. There is also the option for the nano texture display, which the model that Apple loaned to me does indeed have. Now that'll run you an extra $230 here in Australia over the cost of the regular glossy model, and it works quite well. If you do work somewhere where reflection on the screen is a big problem to you, whether it's a bright light or sunlight if you're out and about, then yeah, this could be worth picking up. I don't know again though that everyone needs it. I suspect the folks who are really keen on color accuracy are going to be using an external monitor anyway. It's a nice to have, but it's not an absolutely vital step. But let's bounce straight into the performance, because the performance of the MacBook Pro M4 is why, of course, you might want to upgrade. And here, of course, you have a lot of choices to make between the baseline M4, the M4 Pro, the M4 Max, anything from a 10-core GPU arrangement all the way up to a 16-core CPU, 40-core GPU in the 16-inch MacBook Pro 16. I should also point out for the 16, and I favour the 14, I like the portability, but if you like the 16, please let me know in the comments below. The 16-inch model only comes in the Pro and Max variant, so it's that bit more expensive again. But what I have here is essentially the baseline model. It has the nano texture display. It does have the 1 terabyte drive rather than the 512 gig, which is the absolute baseline. But essentially, the performance is of a baseline M4 MacBook Pro. So how does that compare? Well, I have a really interesting group of MacBooks and other Macs to compare that with. The model that I had to test last year was not the MacBook Pro M3, it was actually the M3 Max, and I was really keen to see where the supposed performance gains of the M4 might reach up towards that M3 Max. So here it is using Geekbench 6's CPU test. Not surprisingly, they're the M3 Max uber alles, but then it should do. It's got a lot more CPU cores to play with, and it cost an awful lot more when it was brand spanking new. What's really interesting here, though, is that comparison between the M4 and the M2 lines, because I think that's maybe where you might start thinking about upgrading after a couple of years. And even at the M2 level, I mean, it's really interesting to see how the baseline M4 is so very close to what the M2 Max does. Although, of course, if you had an M2 Max MacBook Pro, then you might think, well, actually the reason to upgrade is not that strong. And I'd agree with you by and large, unless you really were finding that you were hitting the limits of that M2 Max. But then I'd say, well, the baseline M4 is not going to cut it for you. You're going to need to spend extra on the Pro or the Max. Of course, if you're coming from something that's significantly older, an M1 or especially an Intel-based MacBook Pro, then yeah, the differences there are going to be quite profound. On the GPU side, I have fewer systems I can compare. I just don't have access to those older systems. My apologies. But the results are, again, not that surprising. That M3 Max is just blitzing everything. But again, this is like a $7.5 grand-ish machine last year. You'd be pretty ticked off if a $2,500 machine was beating it handily, now wouldn't you? And again, that jump point from the M3 or M2 systems, not that huge, maybe not that significant, certainly not a huge reason to rush to upgrade, at least at this baseline level. There is a bit more of a bump in Cinebench scores, although I am comparing a Pro with an Air there. They are slightly different markets. But again, I would still stick to the, if you're on an M2, then maybe, but certainly not an M3 at all, based on these performance metrics. On the battery life side of things, Apple continues to do well. One of the big advantages of the switch to Apple Silicon was meant to be expanded battery life. We certainly saw that right from the first M1 devices, but at some point you might think, well, if they keep making these things more powerful, surely we're going to reach a plateau point. We're not quite there yet. Apple's claim for the MacBook Pro M4 is for up to 24 hours of video streaming and up to 16 hours of wireless web, and that's 2 hours more than the baseline M3. Not that I tested with the baseline M3 Pro, and so my point of comparison here is, again, that M3 Max MacBook Pro from last year, and of course that has actually slightly less battery life power because it's got more processing power. But in day-to-day usage, honestly, it's about the same. For most people, this is an all-day battery life machine, and that's really what matters. I mean, if you're plowing through a whole bunch of 8K video rendering away from a PowerPoint, then yeah, you can still send it flat before the day is out. But a lot of people buying these machines will not be doing that, and a lot of the ones buying it for 8K video rendering are probably tethered to a desk anyway. If I do have a complaint about the power, it's a slightly odd one. So it has a MagSafe charging port, and I get that, and Apple has patents, and some people like them. I'm not a big fan of MagSafe, especially because you can just charge over Thunderbolt. I would so much rather have an additional Thunderbolt port where that MagSafe port is. Am I alone in this thinking? Let me know in the comments below. So where does that leave us in terms of thinking about to upgrade or not to upgrade? Well, look, when Apple announced the M4, and specifically the M4 MacBook Pro, I commented that it really did just feel like a spec bump, and turns out that I am actually smarter than I look, because that's exactly what it is. And that bump really only hits the value proposition, I would argue, if you're coming from an M1 MacBook Pro or older. At the M2 level, yes, there are performance benefits to be seen, but they become increasingly marginal. And if you really need the really higher end performance, then you'd be looking at the M4 Pro or M4 Max anyway, and of course those would cost you a great deal more money. If you are looking at this as just a completely brand new machine, you're jumping over to the Apple side of the fence, or just haven't bought a laptop before, then yeah, this is a really solid machine. I would still say the Air is probably the value buy for most regular consumers though, but if you need that Pro power or the additional ports, then yeah, this is a nice machine. Now, I know the MacBook Pro M4 has been out there a while, so I'd love to hear from you your impressions of it, if you've got one, your thoughts on where it's more powerful or where it's better, if I've missed something, comment below. And otherwise, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.